Okay, so now we're going to talk about the factors that affect cap rates. We've gone through a couple of statements of what cap rate is. I want to talk about what affects cap rate. So I like to break it down into two distinct groups. The first one is internal factors or real estate factors that affect cap rate. And the other main group is capital markets, which we'll talk about in the next video. For the first one, real estate factors that affect cap rate, we can break this down into a few different variables. So I'm going to start with the main one that affects cap rate from a real estate perspective. And that one is area. Area plays a huge part, the biggest part of a cap rate. So imagine that you have identical buildings. One is in the very nicest area of town and the other is in one of the worst parts of town. Of course, the one in the worst part of town has a lot more risk associated with it. The one in the nicest part of town has a lot less risk associated with it. So we can assume that one with the lower amount of risk is going to return a lower amount of money, which relates to our first statement of cap rate. The second one, the one in the poorer part of town, probably is going to take on a higher cap rate. What's that spread typically going to be between the worst and the best, assuming all condition and everything is equal? I don't like to put a number to it, but if I had to, I would say around 8% is a good figure. So in my geographic area, for instance, the nicest part of town, maybe a 4% cap. That exact same building in the worst part of town, maybe a 12% cap. So it's a pretty large spread between areas. It might be very different in your part of town. The overall spread may shift. So it might be instead of 4 to 12, it might be 6 to 14 at some point. But area is definitely the biggest one to consider. The second one is age and condition. So they go hand in hand. If we said that area played an 8% spread in the cap rate, age and condition probably is more like 3. So again, let's use a thought experiment. Instead of changing area now we're going to be in the exact same area right next door to each other. But we're going to have two completely different buildings in as far as condition and age go. So same size, same layout. One is 100 years old and is typically in not great condition. Seems like it's getting worse by the day. The other one is brand new build using high quality construction materials. So you can imagine a 3% spread between the best and the worst in the same area. So again, going back to say this one was in the nicest area, the nicest building was a 4% cap rate. The worst building may be a 7% cap rate. So you can kind of see if you compare area and age and condition, you can build the very nicest building in the worst area, but it's unlikely to ever reach even the worst condition building in the nicest area. And that's just because more weight is put on area than it is condition and age. And that makes sense. I mean, if you had the option, say for this exact same return on investment, would you prefer to own an older building in the nicest area or a very nice building in a not so good area? I think most of us would choose the nicest area, all things being equal. The third one I don't want to spend too much time talking about, but tenant base and asset type. So first of all, asset type, commercial office and retail are seen as more risky than multifamily. So therefore, the cap rates are going to be higher. Again, remember, it's related to risks. So the risk is higher. You're going to get higher cap rates typically with office and retail properties. Very easy to think of why. Imagine that you have a multifamily building and one tenant leaves. You could potentially fill that multifamily unit up in even a few hours, if not a few days. Worst case, you drop the pricing and you can get it done at least in a couple of weeks. Compare that to an office or retail store. If you have a restaurant that leaves, it's going to take some time to replace that restaurant, even in the best of economic times. If you put it in the worst of economic times, say now we're having with office buildings, it's extremely risky if you do have a tenant leave. How quickly can you backfill that space? So that's why retail and commercial office are typically seen as more risky and therefore command higher cap rates than multifamily does. Looking at tenant base, it's kind of related as well. You can have variations within tenants. So let's compare for office, you could have, or retail, I should say, a mom and pop shop, burger joint where, they've opened a store and it's, they're paying rent. Or you can have a McDonald's in your retail space. Which would you choose? All things being equal, most would choose a McDonald's. It's established, it's a big chain. They're probably going to be paying rent, have very good terms. So the risk for the McDonald's store is deemed to be lower, and therefore the cap rate will typically be lower as well. I don't like to put a percentage spread on it like I did with area and age and condition, but they're important elements to think about when they affect cap rate.